They never said it outright, but I always knew I was the lesser child, the afterthought. The one they spoke of with half smiles and hesitant nods, while my brother, my perfect, untouchable brother, was the golden thread woven into every family story, every dinner conversation, every framed photo on the wall. From the outside, we were the picture of a well-off suburban family, big house, polished manners, holidays at Martha's Vineyard, but behind the manicured hedges and birthday banners was a quiet cruelty that doesn't leave bruises but leaves something worse: absence. The absence of belief, the absence of recognition, the absence of love that feels real. His name is Ryan, 2 years older, Ivy League, corporate superstar. The kind of man people point to at reunions and say, "Now that's how you raise a son." My parents beamed at him like he was their retirement plan and personal trophy all wrapped in one, and I was Rebecca. The independent one, the one who keeps to herself, the one who was still figuring things out. But that's not how it started. No, it began earlier than I care to admit, maybe even before I had words to describe the difference. I still remember the look in my mother's eyes when Ryan brought home his first straight report card in 3rd grade. She cried, she called my grandparents, she made a cake. The same year, I placed 3rd in a regional math competition. I got a "that's nice, sweetheart," and a pat on the head like I was a dog who'd managed not to pee on the carpet. When I showed interest in building things Lego first, then websites, my dad would raise an eyebrow and mumble, "Let's hope she grows out of this phase." By the time I was 13, I knew what was expected of me. Not excellence, not brilliance, not innovation, but silence. Be quiet, be polite. Don't try to outshine your brother. And so, I didn't. I learned to disappear in plain sight. I faded into the margins of my own family. Ryan was the star quarterback, prom king, valedictorian. His victories were paraded like royal announcements. I was the girl who skipped cheerleading tryouts to finish her JavaScript project, whose name was mispronounced at awards ceremonies no one from her family bothered to attend. I was not rebellious. I was not problematic. I was simply ... forgettable. Do you know what that kind of invisibility does to a young girl? It teaches her to whisper her dreams instead of declaring them, to shrink her ambitions until they can fit into the cracks left by someone else's spotlight. It teaches her to doubt constantly, quietly, and with a smile so no one sees the ache. But here's the cruelest part. The comparison wasn't always overt, it was insidious. It came wrapped in compliments meant for someone else. It came in the way my mother would say, "Your brother was already managing projects at your age," or how my father would glance over my resume and say, "Interesting, but you should really ask Ryan to help you clean it up." It came in every holiday dinner where my updates were met with nods, while Ryan's stories were met with toasts. And the worst was Christmas 2 years ago. My app had just hit 50,000 downloads. A milestone. I was bursting to share the news. But as I opened my mouth, my mother looked at my outfit and said, "You know, you should dress for the job you want, not the one you have." The irony. I was already the CEO of my own company. That was the moment something broke inside me. Not loudly, not with anger, but quietly, a clean, sharp snap. I stopped trying, not at work, at home. I stopped seeking validation from people who were never interested in offering it. I decided I'd rather be underestimated in silence than diminished out loud. But here's what they didn't know. While they were busy celebrating Ryan's every corporate promotion and beach house investment, I was building something from scratch. Alone, quietly, patiently, I was crafting my future in code and wireframes, fueled not by applause but by something far more powerful, the ache to prove them wrong. And I did, but I didn't tell them, not yet. Because one day, I'd walk into a room, our family dining room, maybe, and they'd still talk over me, still compare me, still assume I was behind. And on that day, I'd smile, lean back in my chair, and say something they'd never forget. "But that's not today. Today, I'm just Rebecca. The quiet one, the invisible girl. Still building, still waiting, still sharpening the truth." If you've ever felt like the shadow in your own family, if you've ever been the one they underestimated, overlooked, or simply ignored, then this story is for you. Because sometimes The girl no one believes in is the one who ends up doing the unbelievable. If you want to know what happened when the truth finally came out, when I said the one sentence that shattered decades of silence, then stay with me. You won't want to miss what happens next. And if stories like this resonate with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support us and make sure more people hear the stories we've all been told not to tell. Now, before we dive deeper, let me leave you with a question. Which hurts more, a being criticized openly by your family? Be being ignored or dismissed by them in silence? Comment your answer below, or B, and let's talk about it. They didn't ask where I was going, so I stopped telling them, not in anger, just in quiet resignation. You learn, after enough attempts, that some people don't want to hear about your journey unless it looks like a path they understand. I was building something, and they couldn't see it, not because it wasn't real, but because it wasn't Ryan's. After college, I stayed in Boston. It wasn't glamorous. My first job out of school was at a mid-sized tech firm with bad lighting and worse coffee. My title was impressive on paper, junior developer, but the reality was hours of debugging code for tools no one would ever thank you for building. My cubicle was small, my salary modest, and my apartment a creaking, overpriced third-floor walk-up I shared with two other women who barely spoke to me. But I was building slowly, steadily, invisibly. Weekends were not for brunch or rest. They were for freelance workside projects, code reviews, small apps that paid little but taught me everything. I worked through birthdays and baby showers. I declined dates, cancelled plans, and lived on caffeine and takeout. I told myself this sacrifice was temporary, though I had no idea how long temporary would last. No one at home asked how I was doing, not really. My mother would occasionally call to ask if I had met anyone serious, or if I was still on the computer all day. I kept my answers short. My father, when he called, talked about the market or Ryan's newest project. He asked if I was saving money and whether I had considered something more stable. I stopped correcting him. I stopped telling them anything at all. It wasn't until I met Vanessa that something shifted. She was a senior developer at my firm, sharp, unsparing, and uninterested in office politics. I fixed a bug on one of her projects when no one else could, and instead of nodding like most people did, she looked at me and said, "You see things others don't." That was the first time in years anyone had said something that made me feel seen. Vanessa became my mentor, not formally, not with fanfare, but with quiet consistency. She passed me more challenging tasks. She pushed me to clean up my code. She introduced me to people I never would have had access to otherwise. One of those people was Martin Keller, a venture capitalist known in the Boston tech scene for betting on long shots and winning. The night we met was unremarkable, a company mixer, half-warm beer in plastic cups, the usual banter. I hadn't even planned to go, but Vanessa insisted. I found myself beside Martin, and in a moment of unusual courage, or maybe fatigue, I told him about an idea I had, an app. One that wouldn't just track spending but would actually change financial behavior. Something smart, predictive, adaptive. He didn't laugh, he didn't yawn. He handed me his card and said, "When you build it, call me." I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was celebrating, but because I was terrified. I had spoken something into existence, and now I had no choice but to chase it.
For the next 8 months, I lived in two worlds. By day, I was still the quiet girl in the grey cubicle. By night, I was everything else: designer, developer, strategist, founder. My life became a series of calendars, prototypes, crash reports, and whispered self-doubt. There were nights I cried over broken code. Nights I stared at my screen until sunrise, unsure whether I was chasing a dream or running from my family's silence. I named it clarity because that's what I craved.
Clarity about money, clarity about purpose. Clarity about why I couldn't stop, even when everything inside me was screaming to rest. The prototype worked, not perfectly, but better than I had hoped. I built a beta, I tested it, I pitched it. When I finally called Martin, I was shaking. He remembered me. He scheduled a meeting. He brought other investors. They asked hard questions. I answered every single one, with the kind of conviction that doesn't come from confidence, but from sleepless nights and sacrifice, Martin smiled. Eleanor Blackwell, a notoriously difficult investor, approached me after the pitch and said, "Most of these apps talk about solving problems. Yours actually does." They funded me. $2 million. It didn't feel real. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't call my brother. I didn't post it online. I celebrated with Vanessa and 3 other friends who had watched me fall apart and rebuild more times than I could count. The launch came 6 months later, quiet, controlled, intentional. And then growth, users, reviews, revenue. I wasn't sleeping more, but I was finally breathing easier. Clarity was real. People were using it. People were benefiting from something I created. At work, I handed in my resignation. No one saw it coming. My boss stammered. HR tried to convince me to stay. I walked out of that building feeling both weightless and entirely anchored. For the first time in my life, I had chosen the door I walked through. Still, I told no one at home. When my mother called to tell me about Ryan's new condo on the Cape, I smiled and said, "That's wonderful." When my father mentioned how proud they were of Ryan's new title, I said, "That's great." When they asked about me, I kept it vague. Work is good. I'm staying busy, not because I was ashamed. Because I had learned that not all truths are safe in the wrong rooms. So I kept building. My company grew, my team expanded. I hired better engineers than myself. I finally moved out of the apartment I could barely turn around in. I bought a home, 3 bedrooms, Beacon Hill, light through every window. No one knew, because when you've lived in silence long enough, success becomes something you protect, not parade. And while my family believed I was still chasing stability, I had already built it, quietly, relentlessly, entirely on my own terms. The girl they thought was still figuring it out had figured out everything except how to tell them. But that moment was coming, soon, and it wouldn't be quiet. It was the kind of day that starts crisp and quiet, the kind where the air carries both the scent of autumn leaves and something heavier, like expectation. Thanksgiving has a way of amplifying whatever exists beneath the surface. Joy becomes rapture. Resentment becomes thunder. And on that morning, I knew something was coming. Not because I planned it, but because for once, I was done pretending. I had rehearsed nothing. There was no speech, no master plan, just a growing discomfort in my chest that had turned into resolve. For years, I'd shown up to family holidays armed with silence, playing the role of the agreeable daughter, the one who asked questions and deflected them, who brought wine and dessert and swallowed pride with turkey and cranberry sauce. But this year, I was walking into that house as someone different, and I knew they wouldn't be ready. I pulled into the driveway right on time, but of course my mother answered the door with a look that said I was late. "Everyone's already here," she said, accepting the dessert I brought as if it were some kind of peace offering. "Your brother's been showing pictures of the new house. 4 bedrooms, finished basement, and a hot tub." There it was, the tone. Lightly veiled praise for Ryan wrapped in a comparison I didn't ask for. I smiled, the kind of tight-lipped smile you learn to master when you've spent a lifetime being gracious in the face of dismissal. "That sounds great," I said, stepping inside. The house hadn't changed. Same soft lighting, same smell of cinnamon potpourri, same unspoken tension. My father pretended to watch the football game from his recliner. My aunt and uncle murmured in the kitchen. Ryan, naturally, was holding court in the center of the room, his voice booming with confidence, his fiancée Alicia beside him glowing in carefully curated admiration. "Rebecca," he said when he saw me, standing to offer a brief one-armed hug. "Just showing everyone the new place." I nodded, looked at the photos as they made their way around, tasteful, expensive, designed to impress more than comfort. My mother clapped her hands together like a game show host. "Isn't it beautiful, a real home? Not like those temporary places people waste money on." The air shifted, her words floated out into the room like bait. No one said anything, but I could feel the weight of the question pressing toward me. When would I catch up? When would I finally get it together? I felt the familiar urge to laugh it off, to dodge, to change the subject, but something inside me said, no more. So I set down my wine glass and replied evenly, "I did, actually. I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me." Silence, heavy, complete, and immediate. My mother's smile faltered. Ryan raised an eyebrow. My father looked up from his phone, brows knitting in surprise. What do you mean? My mother asked, her voice tight. I could feel my heart pounding, but I kept my tone measured. I bought a house 6 months ago. Beacon Hill, 3 bedrooms, renovated. I didn't tell anyone because, frankly, no one's ever seemed that interested. The shock moved through the room like an aftershock. Ryan scoffed. Come on, Beacon Hill, on your salary. That's a stretch. My mother reached for control. Sweetheart, it's okay. You don't need to make things up to feel included. Your brother's success doesn't diminish you. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and passed it to my aunt. Here pictures, she gasped. Rebecca, this is stunning. Is that original hardwood? That view? My mother grabbed the phone. Her expression moved from skepticism to something more complex, disbelief layered with a dawning awareness. The modern kitchen, the sunlit office, the rooftop garden. Ryan still wasn't ready to let it go. You could have downloaded these from Zillow. I leaned in, voice quiet but clear. That's my coffee mug on the counter. The painting Stephanie gave me for my birthday. It's hanging in the hallway. Would you like to see the deed? My father took the phone next, scrolling slowly. When he looked up, I saw it for the first time. Pride, mixed with something heavier. Regret. Why didn't you tell us? He asked. I looked around the room, because every time I've shared something important, it's been brushed aside. My apartment was sad. My job was just computers. When I got my first big contract, Mom asked if I'd met someone serious yet. When my app hit 100,000 users, no one even replied to the email I sent. Eventually, I stopped sharing. My mother's face flushed. That's not true. We've always supported both of you. Aunt Carol, bless her, let out a small laugh. Linda, I love you, but come on. I've watched you fawn over Ryan since he was in diapers. Rebecca's had to earn every crumb of attention. Stay out of this, my mother snapped, voice shaking. Rebecca, if you've really been so successful, why hide it? That's hurtful. I met her eyes. You think what's hurtful is not being told. I think what's hurtful is never being heard. There's a difference. Ryan, who had gone quiet, suddenly sat up straighter. Wait, are you talking about that app Clarity? That's yours, I nodded. Our company just bought a license, he muttered. Enterprise version. I didn't know that was you. Most people don't, I said, because I've learned the difference between being visible and being valued. I don't need to be in the spotlight anymore. I just need to know I build something that matters. The room was still. Alicia looked at Ryan like she was seeing him differently. My father put down his drink. Your mother and I, we didn't know. And that's on us. He meant it. I knew he did. And for a moment, I softened, but my mother shook her head. I just wish you'd trusted us enough to tell us, I sighed. It's hard to trust people with your truth when they've spent years telling you it doesn't count. I stood. I didn't come here to argue, but I also didn't come here to play small. Not anymore. I walked out into the hallway. My heart was racing, but I felt lighter than I had in years. From behind me, I heard Ryan say quietly, I didn't know. I really didn't. I'm sorry. I paused. I believe you. But I hope you remember how long I had to carry that weight alone, because sometimes the biggest reckoning isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming space, reclaiming your voice in a room that's long ignored its sound. And for the first time in my adult life, I had done exactly that. Sometimes, healing doesn't arrive with fireworks or grand apologies. Sometimes, it creeps in through the quiet spaces left behind after the storm, in the way someone picks up the phone more than they used to, in the questions they finally learn how to ask, in the effort it takes to say, tell me more, and actually mean it. After that Thanksgiving dinner, something shifted between my father and me. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't send flowers or write me a letter. But 3 days later, he called, not to ask about bills or whether or if I'd spoken to my mother, but to ask, how does your app actually work? And when I told him, he didn't interrupt. He didn't rush the conversation or turn it into something about Ryan. He just listened, like he was trying to understand me for the first time in decades. We spoke for nearly an hour that night. Then again the following week, and the week after that. At some point, the calls weren't scheduled, they simply happened. My father asked about my users, my funding, the stress of managing a team. I watched in quiet amazement as a man who once dismissed tech as a young person's game slowly transformed into someone who read articles I posted and sent me screenshots from financial magazines that mentioned my work. Then came the day he asked if he could visit my office, not out of obligation, but curiosity. He arrived in a crisp navy blazer, holding a box of pastries like he was meeting royalty instead of his own daughter's staff. I gave him the tour, our open workspace, the whiteboards littered with ideas, the conference room we'd named after women pioneers in tech. He met my team, he saw my name on the glass door to my office. When we sat down afterward, he looked at me for a long moment before saying quietly, "I didn't know what you were building, but I see it now, I see you." That simple statement, no embellishment, no guilt, felt like someone had placed a hand on my back and steadied me. For the first time in a very long time, I let myself believe I wasn't building alone. My relationship with Ryan took longer. He didn't call, he didn't text. I expected that. In families like ours, hierarchy wasn't just social, it was emotional. He had always been the benchmark, he didn't know how to exist outside of that role. But 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I received an email. Subject line, "Are you a conversation?" It wasn't long. He admitted he'd spent most of his life performing success, not just for our parents, but for himself. That he hadn't realized how much space he had taken up in our family dynamic. That it never occurred to him that I wasn't just fine, but quietly building something extraordinary without applause. He ended the message with, "I'd like to come see your place sometime." No expectations, just as your brother, and he did, he brought Alicia. They brought a houseplant I never would have picked, but still keep near my kitchen window. He walked through the rooms of my home real, solid, and he didn't compare it to his. He didn't once mention square footage or amenities. Instead, he asked about the framed sketches on the wall, the books stacked beside the reading chair, the coffee machine I had splurged on after my first funding round. For the first time, Ryan didn't try to compete, he tried to connect. The one relationship that remained uncertain was the one I had hoped would matter most. My mother hadn't called, not even to say she was angry. Her silence was sharp, deliberate, a signal of hurt disguised as punishment. And I let it sit, not because I wanted to retaliate, but because I was done being the one to chase peace alone. It took 6 weeks, then one afternoon, I heard her voice on the other end of the line. No pleasantries, just, "I found a photo of you in the attic. You were 7, sitting at that old computer, eyes fixed on the screen like the rest of the world didn't exist. You always looked happiest when you were creating something." There was a pause. Then, "Would you mind if I came by?" I told her yes. She arrived wearing perfume I recognized from my childhood, powdery, floral, the kind that clings to sweaters and lingers in doorways. She stepped into my home like she was entering a museum, reverent, cautious, trying to pretend she wasn't surprised. But she was. I could see it in the way her eyes widened at the natural light, the way her hand lingered on the banister, the way she touched the spine of a book without realizing she had. She didn't compliment everything, that wasn't her way. But she did say, "This feels like you," and for the first time, that wasn't meant as a dismissal. We sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen she once told me I'd never afford with computer work, and she asked questions. Real ones, not veiled judgments dressed as curiosity. She asked what it felt like to manage people, how I dealt with stress. Whether I ever thought about selling the company. She didn't offer advice. She didn't bring up Ryan, she just listened. At one point, she said, "I was scared, that tech world always seemed so unstable. And I didn't know how to protect you from it." I could have said 1,000 things in that moment. I could have reminded her that I never asked to be protected, only believed in. I could have brought up every comment, every comparison, every dinner where I was invisible, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "You don't need to protect me anymore. Just see me." She nodded, her lips trembled. And for once, she didn't try to regain control of the moment. She just sat in it, in the discomfort, in the truth. Over the next few weeks, something began to grow. Not a perfect relationship, not a mother-daughter fairy tale. But something honest, something new. We texted more. She asked about my next product launch. I offered to show her how to use Clarity for her client invoices. She agreed. We weren't healed, but we were healing. That's what I've learned about repairing what's broken. It doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. It means acknowledging it together and choosing to move forward differently. It means trading performance for presence, defense for dialogue, pride for humility. It's slow, it's imperfect, but it's real. And after years of waiting for someone else to change, I realized something. Sometimes, speaking your truth doesn't end the relationship, it finally begins it. The first thing she noticed when she woke up was the silence, the kind that wasn't empty, but peaceful. There were no footsteps upstairs, no passive-aggressive sighs outside her door, no muted voices comparing achievements in the hallway. Just the low hum of the city beyond her windows and the occasional rustle of leaves against the glass. She lay there a moment, letting it all settle in, and then rose to begin preparing for something she never thought she would host in her own home, a family gathering. It had been 3 months since Thanksgiving. 3 months since she'd pulled back the curtain and finally shown her family who she was, not just in words, but in truth. 3 months since the foundation of how her family saw her had cracked wide open. And now, here she was, standing barefoot in her kitchen, arranging a cheese board with precision and care, the morning sun warming the hardwood beneath her feet. The house was hers, every inch of it. From the light fixtures she chose after scrolling through catalogues late into the night, to the oversized windows she insisted on keeping uncovered so she could watch the city breathe. There was a certain intimacy in creating a space on your own terms, in curating comfort not to impress, but to reflect. Her home didn't shout wealth or status, it whispered independence. Her father arrived first, on time, as he always was. But this time, he didn't come with unsolicited advice or awkward silence. He brought a bottle of wine, not the kind meant to show off, but one he thought she'd genuinely enjoy. He stepped inside, took a slow look around, and nodded like he finally understood something he hadn't before. "You've done well," he said, almost reverently. "I've done what I needed," she replied, smiling. They shared a quiet moment in the kitchen, the kind that years ago would have felt strained, but now carried a mutual respect that didn't need to be spoken. He asked if she needed help, and though she had everything under control, she handed him a tray. Not because she needed him to carry it, but because he needed to feel included in what she'd built. Then came Ryan and Alicia, walking in with a houseplant too big for the entryway, but full of good intention. He looked around with something unfamiliar in his eyes, not competition, but admiration. He didn't offer suggestions or jokes this time. He just said, "This place is even better in person," and for once, it felt like a compliment, not a comparison. Alicia hugged her. That, too, felt genuine. Her mother arrived last, as expected. The entrance was delicate, hesitant, as though she wasn't sure if she would be welcomed. She looked polished, composed, the way she always did when she was unsure of her footing. But she carried a small gift bag and extended it with both hands like an offering. Inside was a photograph. A young girl sitting in front of an ancient desktop computer, her face lit not by the screen, but by something deeper: focus, joy, maybe even purpose. "I found it while cleaning the attic," her mother said softly. "You always looked like you knew exactly what you wanted, even when I didn't understand it." It was, perhaps, the most honest thing her mother had ever said to her. They moved through the house together. Her mother touched the walls with the pads of her fingers, pausing at framed prints and lingering by the windows. For the first time, she asked questions that weren't veiled in doubt. When they reached the home office, a room with floor-to-ceiling shelves, a custom desk, and a view that stretched all the way to the river, her mother stood in silence. "This is where it all happens," she finally asked. "This is where I feel most like myself," her daughter answered. Dinner was served at the long oak table she'd chosen, not for trend but for warmth. The food was simple but thoughtful, the conversation gentle, if occasionally stilted. When she mentioned a recent feature launch in the app, her father said he'd read about it in a financial magazine. Her mother admitted she'd downloaded the app and found it surprisingly helpful with her invoices. The acknowledgement was clumsy but sincere, and in that moment, that was enough. Later, while clearing dessert plates, her mother followed her into the kitchen. The door swung closed behind them, and for a moment, they stood there surrounded by the quiet rhythm of dishes and breathing. "I need to say something," her mother began, voice unusually tentative. "Since Thanksgiving, I'd been thinking about a lot of things. Things I did, things I didn't. I know I was harsh. I know I made it harder." She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush to absolve. "I wanted to protect you," her mother continued. "But the truth is I didn't know how to support someone whose dreams didn't look like mine. I didn't understand your world, so I dismissed it. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. It wasn't everything. It wasn't enough to undo the years. But it was something, a crack in the armor." A hand reaching out, she set the dish towel down and looked her mother in the eye. "I spent a long time trying to make you proud. Then even longer pretending I didn't care. Both were exhausting. I'm proud of you," her mother said, tears welling but not falling. "Not because of all this," she motioned to the kitchen around them, "but because you never gave up on yourself. Even when I did, they didn't hug. They weren't quite there yet." But something softened in the space between them. Something new had begun to take root. As the evening came to a close and the last glass was set down, she stood at the door waving goodbye to her family. Not as the overlooked child, not as the one still trying to prove herself, but as a woman who had chosen to live life on her own terms and had been brave enough to invite them into it. Later that night, alone again in the stillness of her home, she curled up on the sofa with her favorite blanket, a mug of tea, and the framed photograph her mother had given her resting on the coffee table. She looked around, the books, the view, the subtle evidence of a life she had built not for applause, but for authenticity. She wasn't just home, she was home, and for the first time in her life, that was enough. In the quiet aftermath of everything, the confrontation, the confessions, the slow mending of old wounds, what remains is not the drama of a single Thanksgiving dinner. What lingers is something far more subtle, far more powerful, the realization that we all spend parts of our lives waiting for permission to be seen. Some wait a lifetime. Rebecca's story is not just about family dynamics or sibling rivalry. It's about what happens when someone grows up never hearing the words, "I'm proud of you," and how that silence can shape a person's identity more than any insult ever could. It's about the cost of comparison, the subtle, daily cuts that come from being treated as less than, not because of failure, but because of difference. But perhaps most importantly, this story is about what can happen when someone finally decides to stop waiting. Rebecca didn't become successful to get revenge. She didn't build her company to prove her family wrong. She built it because she believed in her vision, even when those closest to her didn't. That is the quiet revolution. That is the kind of strength that isn't loud or flashy but enduring. Many of us carry wounds from people who were supposed to love us most. Maybe it was a parent who only praised achievements that fit their idea of success. Maybe it was a teacher who said, "You're just not that type." Maybe it was a partner who couldn't celebrate your growth without feeling threatened. And so we learn to minimize ourselves. We learn to play small, to stay quiet. But playing small doesn't protect you. It only delays the pain. What Rebecca teaches us is that boundaries are not walls, they are doors. Doors we can choose to close, open, or reinforce depending on who earns the right to step through them. She chose to close the door on seeking approval from people who wouldn't give it, and in doing so, opened a door to self-recognition, self-worth, and, ultimately, healing. Healing didn't come all at once. It never does. But it began with one clear sentence, one truth spoken out loud. Sometimes, that's all it takes to begin changing the narrative of an entire life. So what's the lesson? The most important kind of validation is the one that doesn't depend on applause. It comes from doing the work, staying true to your vision, and refusing to let anyone define your worth for you. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to be praised to be valuable. And you don't need to be understood to be whole. You only need one thing, to believe that what you're building, whether it's a career, a family, a dream, or a better version of yourself, is worth it, even if no one else sees it yet, because one day they might. But even if they don't, you'll know, and that's enough. How can you apply this to your own life today? Start by asking yourself, Where am I still seeking permission to grow? Is there a part of you that you've been hiding because someone told you it wasn't good enough, practical enough, impressive enough? Begin there. Take one small action this week that honors your path, not theirs. Whether it's sending that email, starting that project, speaking up in a conversation, or simply stopping yourself from apologizing for who you are. Give yourself the permission they never did. And when you're ready, tell your story, because someone else out there is waiting to hear it, so they can give themselves permission too. Now, here's a simple question for you. Have you ever felt like someone in your family didn't truly see or appreciate who you really are? Yes, I've experienced that often. B, no, I've always felt seen and supported. Please take a moment and comment your answer below, or B, and feel free to share why. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. And if this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of your own journey, or helped you see something in a new light, please subscribe to the channel. It's a small gesture that goes a long way in keeping these messages alive. If you feel moved and are in a position to do so, consider donating to support this channel. I may be getting older, but I still believe in doing meaningful work. Your support, whether big or small, is what helps me keep sharing stories that matter. Thank you for listening. Thank you for showing up. And remember, you are worthy. You are enough. Even if no one else ever said it, I'm saying it now.